This question is for Mr. D'Souza. You want to argue against atheism on its own grounds. You've given very short shrift to faith in these arguments, and you've taken pains to show out the faith-based assumptions in science. So it seems to me you're approaching this whole issue of the existence of God more or less on an empirical basis. My question to you is, what's your evidence for God? Why should an atheist like myself and many of us here take it as trustworthy?
I'll give you one piece of evidence that's rooted in modern science. In recent decades, scientists have asked a very interesting question. Our universe operates according to very specific numerical values. For example, the gravitational force is so strong, the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the electro-weak force. Here's the question. What if these numerical values were a little different? And this is a question Stephen Hawking addresses in A Brief History of Time. And he argues that if you come in and if you think of God as sitting with a bunch of dials, let's say 100 dials, if you touch one of the dials, in this case the rate of expansion of the universe, and move it, not 10%, not 1%, 1 part in 100,000 millionth million, you would have no universe, you would have no life. Now, the point I'm making here is, I'm not talking about the fact that we live on a lucky planet Earth, so I don't want a distortion of the argument. I'm saying the entire universe has to be as big as it is and as old as it is and have the numerical values it does in order for us to be here having this conversation. The universe is a giant conspiracy, it seems, to produce, well, us. This is an argument for design that is completely immune to Darwinian attack. I have never heard a semi-intelligent atheist explanation of why the universe is fine-tuned in this way. I would like to invite Dan Barker, when he has time, to provide one.
Time. Thank you, Mr. D'Souza.
I'm curious as to what the final straw was for you, and when you stopped being a Christian. It was probably a gradual process, but I'd like to know what the final straw was. Thank you.
It was a gradual process. It took 4 or 5 years, starting as a fundamentalist minister, believing every word of the Bible was true. Obviously, I knew there was metaphor in the Bible. When Jesus said he was a door, we don't look for hinges, but I believed that the Bible was true, and I went through a gradual migration where there was no one thing. It started off with things like the historicity of Adam and Eve. Did I have to believe that or not? Moved into more biblical criticism and realizing that the Bible was put together so sloppily, it is so contradictory, it is so unreliable, and then when my eyes were open to look at it from outside to see, wow, it's even uninspiring and even dangerous, I moved into more of a liberal Christianity, and eventually I dumped out all the bathwater and I said, hey, there's no baby there. This whole thing is just one huge figure of speech. There was no final straw. If there had been one final straw, it'd be like asking you, when did you grow up? You know, you probably couldn't point to one thing, but you could point to a process in your life. But so it was just a gradual maturing and growing up.
Thank you. Next question, please.
This is a question directed primarily at Mr. D'Souza, but I would hope Mr. Barker would also comment. My question is this. If you believe in religion, it seems to me that you believe in miracles and you believe in things that seem impossible to common sense without any evidence to support it. Don't you worry about the consequences of that kind of thinking? Many people who are anti-religious say, if you believe in religion, you believe in miracles, you believe in mystical things, you believe in things that defy common sense, and it softens the...
Please keep your questions short, please.
It softens the quality of your thought and leaves you open to all kinds of delusions and illusions that may be dangerous. Isn't that a problem with religious belief? And what does Mr. Barker think about that, too?
No. It was Bertrand Russell who described common sense as, quote, the metaphysics of the savage. In fact, it is the whole history of science that shows that you can't go by common sense. Common sense denies that the Earth is traveling at several thousand miles an hour. For many centuries, it wasn't just religious people, it was scientists who opposed Copernicus and later Galileo because it violated common sense. They thought that ultimately if the Earth is moving so fast and you throw a stone, it's not going to land where you dropped it, it's going to land many yards away. So I think that common sense is not always a reliable guide. Well, the deep question we have to ask is there anything in modern science that invalidates the possibility of miracles? The somewhat surprising answer to that question is no. Science is based ultimately, you might say, on laws. But what are these laws? These laws are generalizations based on empirical examples. For centuries in Western civilization... I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, you're out of time, Mr. D'Souza.
Well, I agree about science and even about history. History, to be useful, has to assume natural regularity across time. And I think you then would agree with me that history is impotent to even prove the miracles of the Bible, for example, because history has to make those similar assumptions. It can't prove them true or false. They have to be taken by faith. That a snake and a donkey spoke human language, that a disembodied hand floated in the air and wrote on the wall, that food rained down from the sky, that a man walked on water unaided. These things that we know don't happen. In fact, if they did happen all the time, they wouldn't count as miracles of how powerful God is. A miracle is something which only counts because it goes against what we know as natural regularity. So you better hope that the scientific method disallows that, basically, based on our experience, so that the miracles can count for it. Otherwise, you're just yanking miracles into the natural world, and they are not really an act of God at all. They're just as yet unknown technological things that we haven't yet figured out with our limited brains.
Thank you. Next question, please.
To Dr. D'Souza, two questions, one on religion, one on God. If God comes to you and asks to kill Dan Breaker, otherwise he'll go to hell, will you do that? And if you don't, does that mean that you are actually obeying rationalism but not religion? The second question is, do you honestly believe your assumption that creation needs a creator, although you cannot answer who created God?
I'll focus on the second question, and that is...
Okay.
I'm sorry?
The
first question is asked and answered. He came late to the debate.
No, I didn't. I put the question that if God tells you to kill him or else you go to hell, and if you don't do it, then that's actually your rationalism, but not religious belief.
No, I was saying that we human beings live in a world of epistemological doubt. Even Job, Abraham, Isaiah, none of us sees God. It's not an atheist idea we don't see God. And therefore, God is an immaterial being. And so to say things like, God's got to show up for us to believe in him and stand right here, this is setting a test which... the question you have to ask is, what evidence would it take for us to recognize God as the immaterial being he is posited to be? Now, the point I'm trying to make here is that we human beings see through a glass darkly, St. Paul's phrase. And this means that we have no single way of knowing. We believe, but we operate in a domain of doubt. See, I think one interesting fact that's emerging in this debate is the Christian is more tentative, in some ways more agnostic, more open to the possibility that he or she is wrong. The atheist is serenely self-confident. I've never seen a miracle, so there can't be miracles. You know, for 2,000 years in Western civilization, the phrase "as white as a swan" was as close to a law because it had millions of corroborating examples. Then the white man landed in Australia and saw black swans.
Time. Thank you, Mr. D'Souza.
No more law.